Welcome to York, one of England's finest cities, World Heritage Site, home to some of the greatest architecture in the land, some of the greatest stories, the greatest history. It's a romantic city, a city of dreams, a city of culture too, and of course it's home to the great York Minster. But dig a little deeper and you'll find that York is a city with some of the most barbaric, gruesome history you could ever imagine, and I love it. The old city of York is surrounded by strong, impenetrable walls, punctuated by just 4 entrances, 4 gates into the old city. And the most important of those, the most powerful, the strongest, and the one that stood here for 800 years unchanged, is here, Micklegate Bar. And you couldn't find a more symbolic building to represent the barbaric history that went on inside these walls than this building behind me. Of course, the residents of York are walking freely below the archways underneath me here, the archways of Micklegate Bar this morning. But do you know what? If it was night time, I reckon some of them had run. Why? Because there's a well-known legend in these parts, a legend that many locals over generations and generations, whilst walking slowly beneath the archways of Micklegate Bar, have felt strange sensations. They've said that they felt something slippery, slipping, falling onto their heads, onto their shoulders, onto their faces. And it's not a giant pigeon. It's the soft, pulpy, slippery, rotting flesh from the severed heads of traitors placed on spikes just next to me here as a deterrent to those entering the city. You commit a serious crime within these walls and your head will be removed from your shoulders. So if you visit Micklegate Bar, take some advice. Run. One of those decomposing, rotting, disembodied heads stuck brutally on a spike on Micklegate Bar was the head of Thomas Percy, 7th Earl of Northumberland, who was beheaded for his part in the Rising of the North, which was a failed attempt at deposing Queen Elizabeth I, a Protestant, in favour of the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots. And his head, a few years later, not that there was much of it left, was rescued by supporters and buried somewhere in the grounds of this church. And legend has it that many locals over the centuries have come into this very graveyard at this time of night and they've seen the headless corpse of Thomas Percy stumbling and staggering around, foraging amongst the gravestones, looking for something. And of course, he's looking for his head. Poor chap. If you were living in York in Elizabethan times and you were a Catholic, or even worse, you were harbouring Catholic priests from across Europe and you were found out, then you could face a punishment more barbaric than you could ever imagine. It seems so picturesque here now, doesn't it? But this was the setting for the rather gruesome fate of one young lady, Margaret Clitheroe. She lived here, married to a butcher just up the road. And it was in this small house up here that she harboured Catholic priests from across Europe. They heard that she was a safe place to hide, and she would welcome them in through her oak door. They would be spirited away in here. Indeed, legend has it, they hid in the attic space above her house and the adjoining house. Well, of course, it was a small city at the time. You can see how close the houses were to each other. And word got out what she was doing. And she was found out. She was caught, she was arrested, she was tried. She refused to abandon her Catholic religion. As far as she was concerned, she'd done nothing wrong. They took her from the prison to Ouse Bridge, where she suffered the most horrendous death you can ever imagine. She suffered pain de corps, which is being crushed by heavy weights. But she wasn't placed under the usual strip of wood with rocks on top. Oh no, the magistrates thought they had something far more ironic, more gruesome in mind. They took the solid oak door from her house. They placed it on top of her and they crushed her to death for harbouring Catholic priests. Seems like a pretty picturesque, innocent place, but delve a bit deeper, you never know what you find. There was a young boy in the crowd on Ouse Bridge. There's many people who'd flocked to see the execution of Catholic martyr Margaret Clitheroe. The young boy was 14, very impressionable. Born into a Protestant family in York, schooled in York. His mother remarried a Catholic, so his stepfather was Catholic. And he was forever questioning with his mother, why can't I tell anybody that my father's a Catholic? Why the need for secrecy? And why should this young Catholic girl be so brutally executed on Ouse Bridge? Why? The young boy grew up and he went on to play a major role in the most serious act of treason this country has ever seen. And if he'd been successful, he would have gone on to change the course of British history. The young boy was called Guido. You might know him by a different name. Well, as we know, Guy Fawkes was caught on the eve before the great Gunpowder Plot was ever put into action, and he was sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered on a giant scaffold outside Westminster Palace. And on the day of the execution, of course, he was led up onto the scaffold, and as the hangman approached him with a noose, he jumped just before the hangman had chance to kill him. He landed on the pavement and broke his neck, thus avoiding the indignity and the agony of being hanged, drawn and quartered. And sitting here, particularly here in the birthplace of Guy Fawkes, the place he grew up in, looking out of the same windows he looked out at the church over the road where he was baptised, I can't help thinking, was he really born innately evil, or was he perhaps just a victim? Perhaps, like Thomas Percy, like Margaret Clitheroe, was he a victim of circumstances? Was he born at the wrong time? Did he see the wrong things? Was he a victim of the city that shaped, informed and influenced the young, impressionable 14-year-old? Was he, Guy Fawkes, a victim of the gruesome history of York?